speaker is someone who has probably had among the most effect on my life, adult life. He is Doug Casey, founder of Casey Research. He has recently published his second novel, Drug Lords. I haven't had a chance to look at it, but his earlier novel was a Speculator, which I thought was the next Fountainhead. Doug has written a lot of books on investments. I won't talk about those. He has lived in 7 countries, and he has been to over 100 countries. And I'm, as usual, looking forward to listening to Doug Casey talking about migrants and the future of the West. Doug Casey.
I promised Doug I was going to give him a gift, and I was going to do it privately, but it's so perfect that I wanted to share it all with you guys, because if I gave this to anyone else here, it would be a practical joke. But Doug has been so kind and patient and generous and answered so many questions, not just of me, but of so many other people. And I have 1,000 books, of which you just saw my recent acquisition. And yet, one of his books is my top 10 favorite books, because it opened my mind to so many different things. Just January in Vancouver, he was inducted in the Hall of Fame. And the Master of Ceremonies had made a 100-ounce of silver wager with Doug, and he paid off in front of 1,000 people here at the Hall of Fame induction. And on my laptop, well, he predicted Trump would win. And on my laptop, at least once a day average, Doug's picture pops up on my screen because of his partner's mega worldwide advertising campaign. In spite of all the books and lectures and travels and investments Doug has made, he is now, because of Porter Stansberry, renamed the man that predicted Trump would win. So what could be a more perfect gift? Donald J. Trump's signature series tie, but not only that, this is the tie the president wears, not this one, but the exact pick red tie. And if you want to wear it or just clean your glasses because it's silk.
Yeah, oh, that's wonderful.
Thank you, Doug.
Thank you very much, Chris. Appreciate that. That's right. And since it's a Trump tie, I know it's the highest quality silk, too. But made in China, right? One brief comment on Adrian's excellent speech. I'm a big fan of a certain Robin Hood movie called Robin and Marian with Sean Connery, fantastic movie. And I liked it especially because it's revisionist history among the many types of but the Sheriff of Nottingham is the real hero, I thought. Anyway, so what I want to talk about now are migrants, political correctness, and the coming collapse of Western civilization. So let me start with migrants. Humans are migrants. They say that we moved out of Africa about 50,000 years ago and spread all over the earth. So we started as migrants. But historically, I think there's different types of migration. So let me break this down. The first one, I think, important type of migration was actually in Sumeria, which is the first civilization we have records of. And they were migrants to the countries around them, the Sumerians. It was the first military conquest, a migration disguised as a military conquest. So that's the first type of migration that's kind of interesting. And then another type of migration that came up was with the Goths in 378, when they beat the Romans in Adrianople, which is part of Bulgaria today, and that opened the floodgates of all the northern barbarians storming into the Roman Empire. And those were migrants too. Incidentally, there's a distinction which should be made, which people don't make, between migrants who were, unwashed, swarthy, undesirable people, and immigrants who were polite and fill out all their forms and pay lawyers and all this type of thing. So I think that's a worthwhile distinction to be made. So you had those migrants that came in from the north to the Roman Empire. Then the next major migration in history was in the 7th century with the Muhammadans. I will call them Muhammadans, which is politically incorrect, not Muslims. That's a whole other discussion. And this was the first migration that I know of anyway, that was driven by religious or ideological things as opposed to just mass swarming. Then you had the Mongols, which very interesting because it was kind of a racial thing. They were all, I mean, these Europeans had never seen people that looked like these Mongolians before. But really the most important migration in history has been Europeans. Europeans have been really successful at this. We invaded the Americans and totally washed away the Indians that were living there. Europeans invaded Africa, invaded the whole world. The whole world became a province of the Europeans. Okay, that's all history, who cares? What's next? They're talking about migrations now. So where's this gonna end? Where's this current, what's happening, where's it gonna end? Well, right now, I think the big thing is African migration. That is where it's gonna be at, and it's gonna be there for the next 100 years. It's not gonna be in and out of the news. That's the first thing. I'll talk about that in a moment. And simultaneous with that is going to be Chinese migration to Africa, because it would seem that the Chinese government, well, if you go to Africa now, you'll see the Chinese are everywhere in Africa. And they're taking over because, say what you will about the Africans, great basketball players and so forth, Chinese are much more commercially adept and a lot smarter. So you're going to have hundreds of millions of Chinese in Africa, and you're going to have hundreds of millions of Africans in Europe. So where's this going to end? It always ends badly for the people that are migrated to. The civilization is being conquered by the new civilization. Always ends badly, at least in the short run. In the short run for them. So we got to ask ourselves now, since Europe and also North America is being migrated to, it's the object of migrants, why do leftists love migrants? Why all the time when you go, oh, these poor migrants, we've got to help them, reach out our hearts, are you unkind and unloving that you don't want to take them into your houses, which Germans are being forced to do, actually. Well, I'll tell you why I think it is. It's because the leftists, and almost everybody out here on the streets, everywhere, they're all leftists. They're all insinuated by this cancerous society. They hate Western civilization. They don't understand that everything that's good that's around them is because of Western civilization, but they've learned to hate it. What is Western civilization all about, incidentally, and why should we defend it? And therefore, why are the migrants, not immigrants, different thing, why are the migrants our enemies? And they are. Because Western civilization stands for personal freedom, stands for capitalism, stands for progress, stands for individualism, and a whole panoply of virtues like those that I just named. And if you don't like Canada right now, I promise you, there's nothing wrong with Canada that 30 million Nigerian migrants can't cure. And that's pretty much what's going to happen. It's going to happen in Europe, but to a lesser degree here. I look at all the cab drivers here, and it seems like Somalis are the latest wave of cab drivers. And I ask these people, how did you get here? I mean, did you save enough for an airfare? How did you pay the lawyer? I mean, and it turns out that the government or NGOs have paid the airfare of all these people to come here. And there's millions of Somalis. Nothing against Somalis. I mean, they're perfectly nice people as individuals. But how is it of any use to the people that live in a place now to bring in a bunch of people that are totally alien and pay for them to come here and do things? Well, just a question. What drives this migration? In other words, what is it that makes people who are living someplace want to move to someplace else? I think there are three major factors. One is war. If your society is, people shooting and bombing and all this, you want to get the hell out of there. Very understandable. I'd certainly want to do the same thing. Of course, what's the major war-making entity in the world today? It's the US government. It's got combat soldiers, not just bases, combat soldiers in varying sizes from, platoon, company, much larger up, in 100 different countries around the world. And you see what they've done to the Middle East recently, and that's just kind of an entree, I think. I think Africa is next on their agenda. So war is one thing. Economics is another thing. All these countries in these third world places that the migrants are coming from, they're all socialist countries. They're all descending into the dark ages, except for import of Western capital and technology. But they'll dissipate that. And as a footnote to that, I think, I've said this many times recently, that what I call the Greater Depression, don't want to give a 2-hour economic speech on why and when and how, started in 2007. The leading edge of the storm was 2008 and 2009. We're in the eye of the storm. Should have been a couple of years ago, but I think it's happening now finally. We're going into the trailing edge of the storm, and it is going to be a worldwide shitstorm, worst in history, worst since the industrial, worst ever. It's going to be horrible. They're very different, much longer lasting, and much worse, much worse than what you saw in 2008 and 2009. And since all these third world countries are basically welfare recipients, and when the going gets rough in advanced countries, the aid's going to stop. The economics are going to collapse in these countries, I think. So that's going to drive migration too. A lot of people are going to want to get the hell out of there to someplace that's better. Laudable, I understand that. I do the same thing. But the last thing, and the big thing, especially for Africa, Africa's a special situation, is demographics. In 1900, only a tiny portion of the world's population were Africans. By the year 2100, and demographics has a life of its own. It's like an avalanche. It takes a long time to get going. It's hard to stop. They estimate about 45% of the whole world's population, and this includes India and China, incidentally, are going to be Africans from south of the Sahara. And what you're seeing happening now in Europe, it's inevitable, because every young African guy has a cell phone. And once somebody gets to Italy, or especially Germany, especially Sweden, he's going to call up his buddy, Mohammed, come here. They give you free money, they give you free food, they give you a free place to live, and there are all these white girls walking around in shorts. Come on, I'd be on that boat in a second. I mean, I'm very sympathetic, but I wonder what's going to happen as there are thousands of these boats increasingly every summer. What are they going to do? How are you going to stop them? Send gunboats out and machine gun them? Well, that maybe it'll amount to that. But probably not, because the Europeans are such pansies. So demographics is very important, but wait a minute. How can I say something like this? That is racist. That is racist, because all the people south of the Sahara, they're all black people. That's racist. This is a political no-go zone. So I think we should discuss racism for a moment. Let me say, racism is perfectly natural. It's natural. It's always been with us. It's not good. Speaking as a libertarian and an intellectual, and somebody who chooses his friends not based upon their economic status or based upon their religion or their race, or I don't care about that stuff. Influences me genetically, like it does all of us. I choose my friends based upon their character and other things of that nature. But it's a fact. You know, people are like dogs. I don't know too much about kids, and I've never had any kids to my knowledge. And the thing, so I don't know as much about people, but I know a lot about horses and dogs. Let me talk about dogs, because everybody's had a dog. Races of people are exactly analogous to breeds of dogs. So let's take a look at these things. Greyhounds and Shih Tzus. Who's going to win the race? Big difference between them, okay? So there's lots of differences in athleticism and physical abilities between dogs. Poodles and bloodhounds. Poodles are hypoallergenic, they don't drool, they have wool. Bloodhounds slobber, they'll shed on you, they're different physically. Australian Shepherds and Irish Setters. This is the one that you're really not supposed to talk about. Australian Shepherds are extremely smart. Irish Setters are incredibly stupid. They really are. They're low IQ dogs. Well, let's translate this all over to races of humans. You're not even supposed to talk about the Australian Shepherds and Irish Setters because somebody might, oh, wait a minute. No, let's do that now. Nordics, Icelanders, for instance, big, powerful, strong, bulky. Bushmen, little, skinny, scrawny, other survival characteristics, but very different. Watusis, natural basketball players, pygmies, not good on a basketball team. Big difference, okay? Jews, really smart, win all the prizes and books and everything. Oh, I better not name. Well, there are so many stupid races that we could fill in a lot of things opposite of the Jews, who are maybe the smartest of all the races. But let's just say there's lots of stupid races. Here's the thing. It's that genetically speaking, starting 50,000 years ago, there was your little clan, maybe 30 people, and maybe your bigger tribe, which would get together every year, a few hundred people. And if you weren't part of the clan or part of the tribe, you were other. And since there was limited roots and berries to grub and very limited deer to hunt, you saw somebody that didn't look like you and didn't dress like you, he didn't talk like you. There's one deer, there's two of you. It's genetically inbred. It's him or me. Kill him. And they were both thinking that. So this thing with racism, it's a natural thing to help you identify your group from other. Okay, so that's just the way it is. Now, the trouble is that the white man has been on the top of the racist totem pole for the last few centuries, last 4 or 5 centuries. That's changing now. I live in South America a lot of the year, and the Amerindians are talking, well, they're doing this in the Southwest, they're talking about the Reconquista, where the people of European descent, they're out of here, and they're not very friendly about it either. And of course, they're reproducing much faster than it's demographics. You know, this is what Arafat said years ago about the Israeli problem. He said, hey, the womb of the Palestinian woman will solve any problem we have with the Israelis. And that's happening all over the world. It's happening in Africa. Talk about the most racist continent in the world. It's Africa. I mean, they're totally racist. If you're is it a Mzungu most of the time in Central Africa? It's okay. If there's one or two of you, bring money, gifts, great. But, you know, and this is the way it is all races. A couple people, great. They can start a new restaurant. They can bring some, you know, this is fun at cocktail parties because they're different. That's groovy. But, you know, you get too many of any other race and they start clumping together and it's a problem. There's going to be a tripartite race war, actually, between Europe and China and Africa. And it's going to take place not in China, but in Africa and Europe. That's going to be interesting to watch. And I hope to watch it from my widescreen in the middle of nowhere in South America. Not up front. Science fiction is the best predictor of the future, much better than these ridiculous think tanks. Any of you ever read a book by Robert Heinlein called Farnham's Freehold? And well, you might recall that in that, our hero is transported into the future, and it turns out that North America is totally populated by, conquered by Africans 1,000 years in the future. Oh, so that's an interesting concept. Quite possible, actually, that that's the way it's going to work out. You remember that book? It was written in 1978, I forget, by a Frenchman that posits millions of Bangladeshis come by boat and basically, take over France. 1978 seemed like a ridiculous sci-fi idea. It'll happen in another form. I'll give you a better one. This is all near-term stuff. It's trivial. Probably the most cosmic science fiction book ever written, I think, was Olaf Stapledon's book, The Last and First Men, written in the 1920s. Work of genius. And in that, well, he projects mankind 2 billion years into the future when mankind, forget about these racial problems for here and now. I mean, as Stapleton says, mankind devolves into a small rabbit-like creature and re-evolves 22 times before the grand climax. So don't worry about this racial stuff. This is all just, intellectual fun we're having. I mean, in the future, if the human race still exists, races will cease to exist and so forth, because we only broke into races. I mean, the humans are only 200,000 years old. We only broke into races per se about 50,000 years ago. Dogs started speciating into breeds, basically, let's say roughly 2,000 years ago. But dog years, human years. So, I'll tell you why the white race is going to be the first to go. Why we're going to be, kept around as actors and, I don't know, what else do white people do well? I don't know, we're mostly actors these days. You see us on television more than you do any others. Two things are going to kill it. Virtual reality. I think within 10 years, you're going to be able to step into your virtual reality suit, which will stimulate all the nerves in your whole body. You'll see, you'll hear, you'll feel, you'll smell, you'll touch. Computer technology will be so good, you'll step into that suit, and it'll be everything you ever wanted and dreamed of. Why step out of the suit? I mean, seriously. There was a sci-fi book written called The Unincorporated Man about that's why civilization collapses. But, Europeans and Americans are going to be at the forefront of that collapse. That's number one. Second thing is if that doesn't work for people, that want to get out there in the world, robotics and the evolution of sex dolls. I mean, let's admit it. It's very nice to have a relationship, but if you can have if you're a guy, I'm speaking as a guy, if you can have a Michelle Pfeiffer at her prime, but without the back chat or any of the nonsense or the expensive habits, come on, choose. And that's what a lot of people are going to do. And females will do the same. Why reproduce? So, and population is falling anyway. So let's talk about civilization and culture. And what constitutes that? And how does this all tie together? Frankly, what makes for a culture or a civilization, slightly different things, but no time to go into that now, is values. People have to share the same values, generally. Speak the same language. Well, first of all, talk about the US. Red counties, blue counties. Not only don't they share the same values, it's at the ragged edge of a civil war, okay? What we had in the unpleasantness of 1861 to 65, incidentally, was not a civil war. It was a war of secession. This will be a real civil war. And I don't know what form it'll take, because half the population is morbidly obese. Well, maybe if they're starved for a while, they'll slim down. and about a third of the population is drugged up on Prozac and Thorazine and things like that, maybe they're not going to fight the way they might. But still, it's almost Civil War kind of non-shared values. So, no values, language, English is, government offices, in Spanish now. Not a step in the right direction if you want to keep your culture or civilization together. Traditions, that's changing rapidly. I promise you that all those Somali immigrants don't share the same traditions or language, or for that matter, religion. I'm not a religious person, incidentally. I'll talk about that a little bit more, or race. So the civilization, the culture in the US is falling apart because those things I just mentioned, those 5 things primarily, are what makes a culture, a civilization. None of them are true anymore. In the 1950s, they were all true. Now you can say what you want about the 1950s, I know. But from this point of view, it was different and perhaps better. Okay, so you got racism. That's my little drill on racism. But that's not the only ism. It's funny, these leftists that are behind, that are pushing for the active collapse of Western civilization. There's other isms that they're accusing Western civilization of. They're accusing the West of racism, which is a lie, certainly compared to any other group in the world. But they're saying that we're guilty of sexism, ableism, plus homophobia, transphobia. This is so insane. Western civilization is the only place in the world where these people, where women are treated like human beings as a general rule, where, people that are, gimpy like Timmy on South Park, where they're treated like human beings and can survive, where if you're gay, nobody cares. I mean, a lot of countries in the world, all over Africa, it's a hanging offense, literally, to be gay. And forget about being transgender. I don't care if anybody's transgender. I really don't care. I just don't want to pay for it. But these people want the public health to pay for their psychological aberrations, which is the way I view it. Most of these leftists are actually crazy. I mean, they're actually bonkers. In fact, I'm talking about speciating in the way of breeds and races. I think people are speciating on mental grounds. And I don't think I can mate with a socialist any more than I can mate with a chimpanzee. They're like, it's a different brain species, kind of. So, but the big one right now, the real hot potato, is Islamophobia. Now this is very interesting. Why is it Islamophobia? These gods that came out of the deserts of the Middle East, you got Yahweh, you got Jesus, you got Allah. They're all different gods. But why is it that, and nobody in Europe is a Christian anymore. Christianity is a dead duck in Europe, dead duck. And it's a dying duck here in North America. I mean, nobody takes all this stuff seriously. But why are we Islamophobic? Why not be Christian phobic too? Actually, it's part of the fact these people hate Western civilization, because Christianity, for better or worse, accidental, causational, I don't know. We can argue about that. They hate Christianity. I don't like Christianity particularly myself, to tell you the truth. But they hate it especially because it's associated with Western civilization. And therefore, being pro-Islamic is kind of like being anti-Christian. A lot more to be said about this. Remember when it used to say in December, Merry Christmas? Well, you can't say that anymore. You have to say, season's greetings. I mean, this is pernicious. I mean, I don't, listen, I like Christmas, and I like the Christmas movies, and I like the bells of St. Mary's, and that's great. I don't believe in any of this stuff, but I think it's nice. But they're trying to throw out all these things that are associated with Western civilization and bring in Islamism, which is really crazy, because if the Islamic people, who generally speaking are much more backward and primitive than people in the West, and they may not be able to read the Quran because they're mostly so ignorant, but if they do, they actually tend to believe it. It is the direct word of Allah. It is not like the Bible, which is transcribed by prophets. It is Allah himself telling you. So you better listen up. Incidentally, I read the Quran. I had to do it. I mean, I'm tired of reading about the Quran and quotes from the Quran. I read the goddamn thing. And about a month ago. And I was embarrassed. I mean, I felt I had to read it, but no intelligent person would waste the time reading it and believing it. 20% of it, I'm guesstimating, but I'm about right. 20% of it is Allah telling you how great and wonderful he is. 20% of it is Allah cursing the kafirs and telling you, they're not your friends and all this type of thing. 25% is Allah retelling stories from the Bible that he kind of vaguely remembers. Not the, like twice told tales where he doesn't get all the details right. Silly book. But these people believe this, okay? They take it seriously. So this is really serious because Islam is a backward, medieval, its values are antithetical, not just different. Oh, well, let's treat them, they're co-equals. No, they're not. It's a ridiculous. It's antithetical to Western civilization. They cannot live together. It's anti-freedom. It's anti-everything that you know and love. And people treat it with respect. I refuse to do that. But there's worse things. These damned leftists are, they're clever. They're taking things that are roughly associated with Western civilization, and they're transforming the words. They're bending them so they mean something. They sound good, but they mean something different than what they did. Like democracy. Everybody's, democracy is good, wonderful. Churchill, they like to quote Churchill, it's the worst of all political systems, but it's better than any other. This is total bullshit. Democracy's fine if you got a little city-state, like in Athens, where there's 5,000 men that all know each other, and they can have a big cafe clutch and kind of come to a consensus. Okay, I can live with that kind of democracy. But democracy with tens of millions of people, this is all nonsense. It's really just mob rule dressed up in a coat and tie. It's horrible. That's a whole thing we can go on to about democracy. But they say democracy's good. It's like an alternative God you're supposed to worship. Nobody's supposed to say anything against democracy. Another thing is equality. Equality is good. Oh yeah, equality is good. I mean, it sounds good, but in fact, listen, the only equality is in the grave. And that's the way it ought to be. Equality doesn't exist in the real world for about 100 different reasons that you guys are all aware of. And it's just an excuse for control for the people on top to make you evil. So I say, I piss upon equality. And also, diversity. Diversity is good, yes. I mean, we should have people, kumbaya, all races and colors and religions and beliefs and everything. No, I don't think so. I mean, you choose people as individuals. If they happen to be of these things, well, that's fine. And if they don't happen to be, that's fine. It's they've got this all completely backwards. Diversity is a code word for seeing people as part of groups, not as individuals. He's a black guy. We want him. No, you don't. You want him because he's an individual and with all the characteristics. Same for all these things. Diversity is poison because it's the way they're selling it. And anyway, as I said earlier, when the guys are hunting the deer and they got to kill each other because only one of them is going to get that deer, birds of a feather flock together. It's true, okay? It may not be good. I may not like it from a philosophical, psychological point of view, but it's just true. And in the future, when we live in Olaf Stapleton's universe, in a different galaxy, and we all look like fish, forget about it. It'll be a different problem. Okay. So let me wrap this up for you. The problem is Western civilization is collapsing. And it's collapsing from inside for all the reasons that I pointed out to you. These leftists who are in total control. They're in control of the switches of power, and they're in control of the universities, and they're in control of everything. They've insinuated all these poor, nice chimpanzees who don't even think about anything because the weather is good and the food is good. And why should they think about these issues? So the leftists have won the battle, the cultural battle, I'm afraid, because Rome fell from the inside, okay? The Western civilization is also falling from the inside, but don't forget, the barbarians that invaded after Adrianople really, collapsed the whole thing. And the migrants, which are going to be coming from many places, and welcomed, stupidly welcomed. It's like, one of the reasons why Rome fell, those migrants from the north couldn't possibly have invaded Rome if it had been the 1st century BC. Why? Because every Roman was armed, every one. By the time of Adrianople, the residents of the empire were not allowed to be armed. They were already serfs. I mean, that's the difference between a slave and a free man. You can't defend yourself. You're not armed. Lots of corollaries that I won't go into. So, wrap this up. These horrible cultural termites that are eating away at all that's good here. They say they love the ecology. They love nature. Well, no, they don't. They just hate people. And they say they love the migrants. But no, they don't. They really hate themselves. That's the problem that they have. Well, look, I hate people too. The fact is, as time goes on, as I think more and absorb more knowledge, I come to hate the human race more and more. I love individual people, but I've got no love for these people out there. They're not necessarily my friends or enemies. But as it turns out, most of them are probably my enemies. Once I open my mouth, it turns out I know they're my enemies. So, you want a solution. You're supposed to, after telling people all these problems, you've got to give them a solution. Okay, I can't solve the cultural problem. That takes too long. I'm going to be out of here in two minutes, Giant. Don't worry. It's that as far as the migrant problem, which was part of the title of my speech, it's very simple, actually. It's a free market solution, of course, which means it'll never get implemented. Two things can be done. We'll solve the migrant problem here, Europe, everywhere. Number one, you don't subsidize people to come to your country. When people came to North America, or for that matter, South America, in centuries before, they bought their own ticket, or they rode in steerage, or they cut a deal to be indentured servants for 7 years, or something. So they paid their own way, so it drew the opportunity seekers as opposed to the welfare mooches, number one. And then they had to support themselves while they're there. But now, all these people that are coming, welcome, we will give you everything. And it was so funny. There was a Muslim imam in Australia that said, no, you Australians need us because your men are impotent and you need us to inseminate your women. I mean, these people are so bold. But he's right. I mean, this is part of a collapse of civilization. This is exactly what goes on. So no welfare of any type to draw these people in. And most of these people living in this country and most of these migrants and the US and Europe wouldn't be here. Nothing to draw them. They'd starve to death. Second thing is, all property must be privately owned. Because otherwise they can just camp on the streets. And what are you going to do about it? It's government property. Where are you going to put them once they're here? So it's very simple. As far as the future is concerned, how's this all going to come down? Well, after we have a serious ethnic cleansing on many, many fronts, something that resembles World War III. I think that Neil Stephenson, to draw you back to a sci-fi book again, in his book Diamond Age, you should read that, work of genius. He comes up with the idea that files, people all over the world of whatever group, whatever's important to them, race, religion, interest in collecting stamps, 1,000 different things, million, will, because of the internet and the jet plane and other things, will get together. My countrymen aren't Americans living down the street from me in Aspen in the trailer park. My countrymen might live in the Congo as easily. I mean, because I might share some values with these people. So that's what's going to happen. People are going to realign, and these stupid nation states are going to go away. And that's the long-term future. Okay.
We
Thank you.
If there's a couple of questions, if you want.
Oh, okay.
Regarding welfare, I would say there should be no welfare period here, whether it's for immigrants or for people over here as well.
No welfare at all. It should be abolished totally.
Right.
Totally.
Right. And the other thing you can possibly do is, instead of having lawyers and political asylums, just decide how many people you want, if you want, and then auction those rights. Because people who come here do have access to much more capital than they have in their own country. So if they contribute, so be it. Get the best and the brightest and the people with the most money.
I absolutely agree. Total and absolute freedom. In fact, I only have one moral law. You know, libertarians say there's two moral laws. Do all that you say you're going to do, and don't aggress against other people or their property. That's good. Simple. Most people can remember two things, but it's easier to remember one thing, and it's natural. The whole of the law shall be do as thou wilt, but be prepared to accept the consequences. And if people know, you can do anything. You can shoot this guy. You can do anything you want. But what are the consequences of that? I think it would be a much more peaceful planet with just one law. Kind of relates to what you said.
Just one last question.
The one fact that I was quite surprised that you didn't emphasize, and which is the obvious reason for any collapse of Western civilization, is the reproduction rate of white people. How many Doug Caseys are in the world, in the white world? A lot.
I suspect I am part of the problem.
Yes, you are. The average number of children per white woman in the world is probably down around 1.3.
But remember, I said it's going to get worse with virtual reality suits and with sex dolls. So you haven't seen anything yet.
But with virtual reality, the thing is, it isn't going to last, because you can't reproduce with a virtual woman.
That's right.
So if you want a solution to that, I don't know what you're going to do, because
you're not going to do
I don't think you're in favor of a top-down promotion of fertility.
No, I'm not. Listen, because right now, the white people and also the Chinese people and the Japanese will get into this, like a little bit, just a slightly bit behind us, none of them are going to reproduce.
Right.
Yeah, exactly. And since the Africans have no money and no education, they'll be the last ones.
Well, reproduction rates in Africa are also coming down, but but not as rapidly.
Not as rapidly. You're quite correct.
Now, if you want to really fix this, go and make them all rich. That'll help a heck of a lot. That'll bring their reproduction rate down to ours, and you won't have a problem.
I know, but we've been talking about how they're not going to become rich unless they change their culture, and it's a big problem. Thank you very much.